Hopefully everyone can hear me. This is Laura Barman with the Secretariat. Welcome to the plenary meeting that's online, and we are recording this meeting.
Hi everybody, this is Bob Blakely, Plenary Chair of the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group. Welcome to our online plenary meeting. I'd like to start I'd like to start with a discussion which is technically out of our agenda, and that is the discussion of the current weather conditions in the Northeast. The hurricane, of course, is going to come on shore sometime this afternoon or this evening, and I want to be sensitive both to inclusiveness in view of people's preparations and the conditions in their area, and also to ensuring that people are not using valuable electric power or attention in a way which endangers them in any way. So I would like to begin the meeting by having a short discussion of whether anyone feels that we should recess this meeting and re-adjourn at a later but not too later date after the storm is past, or whether we should continue with today's agenda and dispose of this business and then proceed to the in-person meeting as we go forward. So I want to turn it over to Kay Shepard-Cohen to talk about how to use the GoToWebinar controls to interact with the presenters as we have this discussion and as we go forward with the rest of the discussions, if that's what we decide to do. And after Kay has introduced us to the controls, I'm going to invite all of you to raise your hand if you have an opinion that we should recess the meeting, and if there are not many such opinions, we will proceed. So Kay, if you could please explain how the meeting is going to work.
Thank you, Bob. Actually, I think I would like to defer this to Laura Barman, who is on my staff and is the organizer of the webinar today. I'm guessing that she'll have better details than I could provide. Laura, do you mind?
No, I don't mind at all. This is Laura, and there's just a few things I'd like to point out. First of all, we are having a SOAP Hub chat. That link should be visible on your screen. So please join the chat there if you'd like to chat to other attendees. If you want to ask a question, please type your question in the box and it will go to the presenters and we can handle it from there. And then if you would like to be unmuted to speak, raise your hand unless otherwise instructed to raise your hand for a different purpose, such as voting or things like that. And that's it. That's it for now.
So I note that there are a number of hands raised in the meeting, and so I'd like to first go to Dave Kearns, and Dave, I'm unmuting you to speak.
Okay, I thought you might call on people, but this is Dave Kearns, and I had actually come here planning to make a motion that we adjourn and postpone this meeting to a later time, because I'm sure there are a number of people like me who will not be able to give their full time and attention to this as the storm intensifies throughout the Northeast this afternoon. So I think that's a wonderful idea to move this meeting to another day. Moving it off a week certainly won't make a large bit of difference to what we wanted to do here today.
Thank you, Dave. Just a moment. I'm going to try. Now I'm going to unmute Deb Gallagher for the purpose of speaking. Deb, did you want to say something? That seems not to have been successful. I'm now going to unmute Dr. Andrew Omidvar. Andrew, if you can hear me, please make your comment.
I support the idea of adjourning and doing it in some other time unless there is an urgency to be done today.
So let me address that point specifically. There is a 90-day limit on our interim rules, and if we pass that 90-day limit, there are no longer any rules binding the organization, and we will not be able to proceed in good order. The 90-day limit expires on November 15th. We do have a plan to not adjourn, but rather recess this meeting to next Wednesday, if it is the sense of the community generally that we should do that. But I still want to go through and get the remainder of the comments before we conclude that is the right course of action. But there is some urgency, but we are not yet at the point of no return from the point of view of the calendar. Next, I will unmute John Bickham. John, if you could give us your comment.
Thank you. This is John Bickham of Microsoft. My concern about proceeding today is perceived lack of legitimacy. I think it's unreasonable to expect folks on the East Coast who have potentially life safety issues to devote their full time and attention to the business at hand. And my concern is that if we proceed with a whole bunch of folks unable to contribute or pay full attention, that the results, however they work out, would be challenged. We have some items on the agenda that are quite contentious, and I'm concerned that we have a disposition of those that is perceived to have full legitimacy. So I'd like to see us adjourn for the day.
So I'm now going to unmute John McTaggart for the purpose of making a comment. John, if you could proceed. John McTaggart. I will come back to John McTaggart. Let's see, I'm looking for other hands. I'm now going to unmute Phil Wolf for the purpose of making a comment. Phil.
As long as there's a follow-up date, I don't know the reason why.
Let's know that the MBTA will be shutting down at 2 o'clock.
Or to continue.
Yes. Go ahead, Phil.
So long as there's a follow-up date, I don't know any reason why not to continue next Wednesday.
Thank you, Phil. Now I'm going to go back up to the top. I believe that Peter Davis and Peter Brown both have hands up in the SOAP Hub chat. If I could ask Peter Davis to give his comment. Peter Davis. Let's see, is it actually possible for me to find Peter Davis and unmute? Oh, sorry. Peter, I believe that you're now unmuted. Sorry about the confusion. Proceed, please.
Quite all right. Thanks, Bob. So Peter Davis, I would suggest that we actually determine the distribution of attendees, and I don't know how many people are in person at the original convening location or not. I'm actually in Northern Virginia, and I have to say that it's not too terribly disconcerting at the moment, and so I'm online attending, and I think that would be fine to proceed. It would be much more preferable for me to do it this week rather than next week, simply from a scheduling standpoint.
Thank you, Peter. Peter Brown, I'm now going to unmute you for the purpose of making your comment. Go ahead.
Yes. I just echo the previous speaker's comment, at least to the extent of saying I think we can proceed with some initial presentation of the Rules of Association, the proposed amendments and so on. I think the issue about how we go ahead with the ballot is a different issue. I actually put a question in the chat, was, what proportion of people that have said they would attend are actually currently online, because if that is still significantly high, I think we have a reasonable quorum, but I'm sensitive to the fact that indeed there are much fewer people than we would have hoped for. Maybe one idea for you to consider, Bob, with the Secretariat would be to have a discussion today, follow that with an extended period of an open ballot, and if a substantial number, say for example 500 or 600 out of the 1,000 plus who are registered actually do already approve of the rules of association, maybe we can have a shorter meeting next week to just formalize that. But I leave it to you really to determine on what you think is the best way forward based on the number of people participating.
Thank you, Peter. And I will note for the record that we had 250 people registered for today's webinar. We currently have 161 people online. By the way, if if you had your hand up and you've already been recognized to speak, if you could lower your hand in the GoToWebinar panel so that I can see the people who haven't yet been recognized more easily. I'm now going to recognize Dan Schutzer for the purpose of making a comment. Dan, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
The main concern I have is that I guess by the deadline I have this meeting next week, and some of us, myself included, have lots of conflicts next week. So if we could perhaps address the essential part of this meeting that needs to get done by a certain deadline, that might be helpful. And then we could schedule a more complete meeting with enough advance notice.
Thank you, Dan. I will just observe again that it is actually relatively urgent that we conduct a vote on the revised rules of association before November 15th so that we are not left in a situation of constitutional crisis where we have no, no rules governing our activities. I believe I'm going to lower everybody's hands in the GoToWebinar right now. If you still have a comment that you haven't made, please raise your hand again. And I see that there is one such, and if I can figure out how to scroll correctly, I will. Jack Seuss, when I try to unmute you, it says send audio pin #94# to enable muting. I don't know whether that's an instruction to me or to you. Let's see. Let's see whether that works. I'm trying to unmute you, Jack. Give it a try and see if you can speak. Oh, yes, you need to enter #94# on your telephone, Jack, to unmute yourself. Jack, I'm hoping that this will work. So I'm going, while we're waiting for Jack, I'm going to unmute Dave Kearns to speak one more time. Dave. Hello, Dave Kearns. Daza, I believe you were trying to speak. Let me see if I can. I'm unmuting Daza to speak. Daza.
Thank you. Well, it seems to me that with the number of people on the line now, and and compared with the number registered, that it would make sense to continue and to shorten the meeting considerably, and to lengthen considerably the amount of time for ballots on the governance measure. And frankly, because we would not have time to do the other very important items, reports from Management Council and the NPO, and more discussion about IDESG generally before our next in-person meeting, to please consider having a longer online plenary meeting, not long to follow after this, to take up all of the other items that we do need to begin work on prior to even our next in-person meeting.
Thank you, Daza. So in the interests of making progress, I believe that the majority of people whose hands have been raised have been able, oh, well, let me try unmuting Jack Seuss again now that he's got a different microphone methodology. Jack, would you like to speak?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just, my one question would be, could we have an extended voting period that might span a week, and some could start voting as of today, but we could hold the another session on this at a later date to bring more people in.
So this, thank you, Jack, is one of the options that we had discussed in our emergency preparedness meeting this morning, and the option essentially would be to work quickly through the amendments today to see which ones have consensus and which ones should be deferred to the follow-on governance committee established under the rules of association, and then to open the ballot as scheduled this evening at 6 o'clock, but to leave it open until 5 p.m. This coming Sunday, and not have the results of the vote announced until the following Monday, in recognition of the fact that people might have trouble voting due to power outages and what have you. So what I'd like to do at this point is I would like to try to get a sense of the room. So I believe that the two options that we have discussed are, number one, recess, not adjourn, for procedural reasons. That's important. Recess this meeting until next Wednesday and reconvene with the same, by the way, next Wednesday is November 7th, with the same agenda that we would have worked through today, and conduct a somewhat extended ballot probably through the following Sunday, the Sunday after November 7th. That's option number one. And option number two would be to continue today and to leave the balloting period extended. So what I would like to do is I would like to ask how many are in favor of option number one right now, which is recessing the meeting until next Wednesday. So that is the poll that you're voting on right now. We'll wait while the polling on this concludes. So if you could please vote yes or no to the proposition that we should recess the meeting until next Wednesday and hold it with approximately the same agenda on next Wednesday with a somewhat extended voting period. That's the proposition that's being voted on right now. 70% of you have voted. If you have not voted, please take the time now to click the poll box.
Hey, Bob, this is Laura. I see that Dave Kearns has his hand up. Would you like to unmute him?
I will, yes, thank you. There's also Abby Barber and Arthur Friedman who have hands up. So Dave Kearns, please speak.
Yes, thank you, Bob. I noted the numbers of people we have here, and I'd like to suggest we have the absence of a quorum, which means we cannot consider the amendments and vote on them, which means that the rules of association cannot be finalized by the end of this meeting, which means that the voting cannot begin.
So the quorum for an electronic vote is not the same as quorum for an online meeting, and the quorum for this meeting, the rules as we're interpreting them are that of the people registered for the meeting, we need to have 50% or more present. So I have got the Secretariat busy determining whether or not a quorum exists, but I submit that it is not clear that a quorum does not exist. I'm going to call on two other people. It looks like we're reaching the end of the vote. Let's see, I'm scrolling through. Arthur Friedman, I'm going to unmute you for the purpose of speaking.
Yes, I don't know if you can hear me. This is Art Friedman.
Yes.
Okay, great. My only concern was without having sufficient participation from both government and industry to vote and participate in the discussions, and that's why I was concurring earlier on with delaying the meeting.
Thank you. There are a few more comments which I'd like to get to in the couple more minutes we have till everybody votes. First, I think it's Jana Bomer. Jana? It may be Lana Bomer.
Oh, I just was voting on the poll.
Oh, okay. So you didn't have
Sorry.
your hand raised.
No, I did not. No, sorry.
Thank you. I believe Jim Elstey would like to speak. Jim, recognizing you.
Morning, Bob. Thank you. I just wanted to put in a vote for using the time and the folks who convened here today to go over and discuss the material on the rules of association. I think it would be helpful to have that discussion. We don't need to take action on it. I think we'll probably see the poll come out in favor of postponing. But I think since we're on the line, having that discussion would be fruitful.
Thank you, Jim. Jack Seuss would like to speak again, I believe. Jack?
Oh, I apologize. I didn't mean to have my hand raised.
Okay, that is not a problem. Muted again. I'm going to scroll down here. Neville Pattinson. Neville, unmuting you.
Hi, Bob. I just have a simple question about November 7th. Are you proposing an in-person meeting or an online meeting again?
No, we're proposing essentially an exact duplicate of this meeting, an online meeting with the same agenda as today and the same schedule with the extension that the voting period would be extended.
Very good. Thank you.
Let's scroll down. I thought I saw another hand, but apparently I did not. John Bickham, I'm not sure if this is a repeat. John, unmuting you in the event that you would like to speak.
Yes, I just wanted to support the suggestion just made that although we would technically be in a state of recess, that we continue and at least discuss the documentation that we have on the agenda today. I just am uncomfortable making decisions.
Thank you. And let's see. I've got, oh, wait, I think I might have one more hand. No, I have no more hands. I'm putting all the hands down now. I'm going to conclude that we've had enough participation in the vote to determine the consensus. We have 61% in favor of recessing the meeting to next Wednesday, November 7th. So I will take that as the will of the plenary. I do, however, think that it is a good suggestion that we should work through as much of the agenda that does not include actually trying to gauge consensus on disposition of the amendments and actually conducting the vote as possible. So I'm going to propose that we will have the preliminary presentations, including the presentations of the substance of the amendments and maybe discussion of the amendments, but not a poll to dispose of the amendments. And we will go forward with an abbreviated version of the agenda. So with that in mind, Daza, well, so first of all, can we conclude the poll at this point? That's a question directed to Laura, so we can take the poll down. And can we return the screen to Daza for the purpose of working through our presentation? Laura. Daza, apparently you have to do this on your screen. Could you take control of the meeting? Yep. And let's see,
sure.
I can close.
And the presentation is on Eric's machine, so we're attempting to present again from his machine now?
Yes.
Okay, and there we go.
So, having disposed of that discussion item, I will call the meeting to order. And I am going to, first of all, thank the Governance Task Force, its chairs, Daza Greenwood and Eric Skase, and its members for the work that they've done since Chicago to put together a set of rules of association which remedy some of the defects that we observed in Chicago. It's been a lot of work. And it's on a very compressed time scale. We really don't have a lot of options. We do have to adopt a set of rules that will bind our behavior by November 15th. and I want to commend everybody involved in the process for working in a real spirit of consensus and compromise and making progress. I also would like to thank the Secretariat for the support that they've provided both technically and administratively in moving both the governance work and also just the administrative work of the various committees forward. I think it's been a very effective and efficient job. So thanks very much to everybody. So the next item is a review of what we've done since our Chicago meeting. This would normally have been delivered by Brett McDowell, but Brett has had to take some time off for personal reasons, and so I've asked his co-chair, who is Jeremy Grant of the National Program Office, to step in for Brett and give a review of some of the accomplishments since Chicago. So let me see if I can unmute Jeremy so that he can speak. If I can find him on here. Oh, rats. Is Jeremy? Oh, there we go. So Jeremy, unmuting you for the purpose of speaking. You should be unmuted now, Jeremy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you very much.
Okay. You unmuted me, and then I was still muted. So, yeah, I'll try to be brief. One, thanks for everybody who is participating here, particularly those who are actually stuck in the middle of Sandy. I know it's true dedication for you to actually be, if you are stuck in the Northeast right now or the Mid-Atlantic, for spending some time here today. As Bob mentioned, I'm really speaking in two distinct roles here at the meeting, one on behalf of the government and the other as the acting head of the Management Council, since, as Bob mentioned, Brett is out and couldn't participate today. I wanted to just speak a little bit right now from the perspective of the Management Council, particularly, now that we're 10 weeks from the creation of the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group. I think my first statement would be a simple wow. There's been a flurry of activity that we've seen since August that has really been quite remarkable. At times, it's certainly been chaotic. The agenda that we had planned for the in-person meeting that we hope to kick off today was really focused on bringing a bit of structure to the chaos, and I'm really looking forward to actually picking that up when we finally get the in-person plenary rescheduled. It's also worth noting on the remarkable side of things, our membership has continued to grow. As of Friday, there were more than 1,100 individuals registered to participate in the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group on behalf of 417 organizations and companies, along with 268 interested individuals. If we were in Dulles today, the registration looked like we were on pace to get close to 300 people in attendance. That would have been up 50% from the Chicago meeting and close to another 200 online. Heading into today's discussion, we really had a chance last week to poll members of the Management Council to share a couple thoughts on what we've been doing as well as lay out some perspectives on the role that the Council will play going forward. Really just a couple points. One, I think it's fair to say that the Management Council overall has been in the spin-up mode, as much as some of the individual groups and committees have. With this group being created as a new body with elected members not previously used to working with each other, and also going through a process where the extent of its role was called into question right away in the governance task force, I think members have been holding back a little bit and sensitive about finding the right balance to engage. Specifically, some actions were taken in the governance task force reflected in the documents that are before you today that will make the Management Council a bit less powerful than was originally envisioned. To be clear, these changes are supported by the Management Council members, and if anything, they have been holding back a bit on some of the items in deference to the pending changes. Now, that said, the new rules of association lay out a pretty clear path for the Management Council. Having these in place should provide a foundation for the group's activities and deliberations. My own personal view, I don't know if it's supported by everybody on the Management Council, is that while the new governance documents somewhat diminish the overall power of the Council on paper, I think the changes are largely irrelevant. Not that some of the changes aren't notable, but rather, at the end of the day, the biggest authority that the Council is granted is the opportunity to lead. Opportunity is an important word here, and it's a big deal. I think a Council that's been granted all the authority on paper but doesn't exercise it doesn't end up having much authority at all. Things like authority, power, influence in a multi-stakeholder organization like this all flow from good ideas and leadership. So to the extent that our members in the Management Council show leadership, the group's going to have a very positive impact on the work of the broader steering group. The second sort of consensus comment I wanted to share is that as we prepare to move forward on crafting a framework for the identity ecosystem envisioned in the national strategy, it's important that steering group members recognize we're not starting from scratch. It may be tempting for some members to treat this as an opportunity to try and create something de novo, but doing so overlooks the good work that's already been done in many sectors today. Moreover, taking the de novo approach really flies in the face of the NSIC itself. For those who haven't carefully read the strategy, much of what it prescribes is looking to existing trust frameworks and other efforts already in the marketplace to serve as the core of the identity ecosystem, and also looking to spur the creation of new, more diverse trust frameworks that will join the ecosystem. 10 weeks ago, we were in Chicago, as I stated in my remarks to the group, when we first launched this effort, and what I continue to refer to as a horrible mixing of ocean metaphors. Our goal is not to boil the ocean, but rather go surfing where the waves are. In a strategy where the government ultimately wants to see the private sector on point, we think the most sensible way to achieve success is to look to jump in where there are already waves, working with those of you who are already making them and looking to influence and support those efforts, rather than starting from scratch. So I am hopeful when we actually get together in a few weeks for an in-person meeting and talk about a framework, we can look at what is out there today and how we can shape and influence it into what's envisioned in NSIC, rather than start from scratch. Today, I know we're going to start talking a little bit more about governance documents that will actually govern this group. I'm personally thrilled, as opposed to the Management Council, that we're doing this, and that when we finally do approve these documents, and I know we actually have to postpone things a little bit with the weather, we'll finally have a foundation in place that will allow the actual work of this body to move forward. In the meantime, we've got a hurricane short meeting, so let's get on with what we can. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. The next item on our agenda is the presentation of the proposed rules of association. I'd like to say one quick thing. I got a private message from David Turner expressing a concern that people who are not able to attend this meeting won't have the benefit of our discussions. That's not going to be the case. We have asked the Secretariat to record this meeting. The meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on the site following the conclusion of the meeting. So people who have not had a chance to attend this meeting will have the opportunity to benefit from the discussions that have taken place. So thanks very much to David for bringing up that issue. So at this point in the agenda, it's time to recognize the chairs of the Governance Task Force, Daza Greenwood and Eric Skase, to describe quickly the process that they have gone through to create the rules, and of course we've already had a recorded webinar last week which went through the rules in detail. So I am now going to unmute Daza and Eric for the purpose of conducting this portion of the discussion. Daza, over to you. And I cannot hear you right now. Are you muted on your end of the line, Daza? Daza, I don't know what you're speaking into.
Yes, it was on, sorry about that. We had a software mute. Thank you, Bob. Eric Skase and I are together here in the same office in Cambridge, and would be happy to do a quick overview of the process that the Governance Task Force went through, highlights of the revisions to the initial governance documents that you'll see within the rules of association that are presented for consideration for adoption by the plenary, and to go over some of the included next steps that were part of the presentation of our recommendation, including what will happen going forward for intellectual property membership, and some other governance, more detailed tweaks that are needed to follow. The Governance Task Force was really created by the first meeting of the plenary, as Bob was saying, to address some deficiencies of the initial draft. The IDESG did vote to have some general principles based upon the NPO proposed charter and bylaws, but at this point we do not yet have our initial governance documents pending a revised recommendation back to the plenary. So we're still in pre-rules mode at this point, and the proposal that will be addressed by the next plenary as the first adoption of governance would require a 50% majority, and then going forward, votes and procedures would occur under the rules. At the last plenary in Chicago, we convened the first meeting of the governance task force. It was very well attended, and chairs were selected. It was Eric and I, and a number of issues were identified by going around the room as our first cluster. Following that, we did meet at least weekly, sometimes more often, and also had a second in-person meeting in the DC area. And I think it's fair to say we identified a large number of individual issues and themes that required addressing or that people wanted to have addressed. And we also had a process where it was possible to speak more generally about a high-level view or replacement or complete alternative approaches for governance for the IDESG. So all views were heard, and we did everything we could to reach out to all members and the Management Council and Privacy Committee and other committees to make sure that there was some engagement with our liaisons and by seeking more input. Through that entire process, the first major phase was for the governance task force, actually should give some kudos to Bob based on a recommendation by Bob to not attempt to have a large group come up with the final wording for kind of red-lined amendments, but just slide by slide in the PowerPoint format to establish what the points of consensus were or agreement for the changes that we would want to have made. And those were determined through online and in-person meetings, and we were afforded support from the Secretariat with some attorneys and other staff support to then, in a neutral way, reduce those drafting instructions to legal language in a red line of the draft, which was then presented back to the governance task force for our, in some cases, acceptance, and in many other cases, further large round of tweaking, where we developed a spreadsheet of hundreds, I believe, of further amendments that were provided from governance task force members and others, which we then went through methodically in many meetings and determined that some of them were accepted, some were modified, and some were determined to be deferred to a follow-on process, which we'll talk about in a moment. At the end of the day, and then the major anatomy of success for the governance task force, and one that I hope the IDESG will learn from and use as appropriate, was the creation of tiger teams, we call them, largely comprised of members that were interested and who had different views, sometimes opposing views initially, and who were important stakeholders on a given issue, whether it be workflow or approval of technical measures, privacy-related protections, and so on. And those smaller teams of people worked out potential acceptable resolutions and recommended those back to the overall task force for discussion, frequently further tweaking, and then incorporation to our drafting instructions. At the end of the day, there was thoughtful compromise and resolution of all of the priority identified issues with the initial NPO's recommended charter and bylaws, and many more issues that we discovered along the way, which have been incorporated into the Rules of Association draft that you see before you today. However, in the short time allotted to do our work, we were not able to address in a comprehensive way every issue that was identified. And there were many hundreds of issues that were identified for potential, further clarification. And so an important part of the anatomy of the proposal is to continue the success of a member-led governance committee, open to the Management Council and all members, to continue to look at the deferred items for the future and to propose back coherent and comprehensive sets of governance updates in the future. So that at a very high level is what we did and how we got where we are. Eric Skase is going to run us through some of the highlights of the substantive differences in the rules, and then we'll just close with a quick overview of the adoption process and how this would, and immediate next steps that are needed with respect to intellectual property, developing an online e-deliberation rule, and some other short-term and longer-term items for governance. With that, Eric.
Hi, this is Eric Skase's voice. And I'm not going to attempt to reproduce all of the information which was provided during the webinar that was held at this time last week. Since actual consideration of the amendments and final balloting of this document are being postponed, you do have an opportunity to go to the IDESG website and review that webinar if you've not had a chance to do so already. Now, the rules of association document that are in front of you are made up largely by a bulky document here organized in the outline that you see. And we're just going to quickly run through highlights of some of the sections. The membership section does require that a membership agreement be signed by people or organizations that wish to join the IDESG. We don't have that agreement finalized yet, and there's an explicit provision to cause that agreement to be developed post-haste so that members can execute it by a deadline date to be set in the first part of next year in order to trigger the elections process that's planned to occur next spring.
And a very quick alert, please review the draft IP rights policy that we have developed thanks to participation leadership from David Rudin and Jamie Clark and others. That is linked currently at idecosystem.org under the Rules of Association page, and it's also been emailed. Please get a start on beginning to review that so that we can have a quick finish to follow. Thank you.
Yes, that document is a snapshot of the work in progress, and I'd say it's quite advanced, and we will be looking forward to wrap that up very quickly with your approval of the motions that are before us. Other than that, membership classifications, organizational and individual members sorted into voting and non-voting categories, and provision made to allow public participation in liaison relationships. Section 2 talks about the steering group structure. There's a plenary, which is the authoritative body, with a chairman and now also a vice chairman. The committees are the workhorse part of the organization, open to participation by all members and observation by the general public. Each of the standing committees is expected to have a charter that would be approved by the plenary ultimately and reviewed by others along the way. And then a very specific call-out role for the Privacy Committee in looking at work output and other key actions. The Management Council handles administrative tasks outlined here, has 3 officers also outlined here, and there is to be developed a specific complaint procedure in more detail by the Ombudsman as a follow-on activity under the proposal. Elections. Very similar to what you saw in Chicago, a group of offices that are elected by all voting members. That includes the plenary chair and vice chair, the management council chair, and after a couple of years, the vice chair of the management council will also become an elected position, and then 2 at-large management council delegates. In addition, there are stakeholder delegates for the management council that will be elected by voting members who have chosen a stakeholder category. And that's the primary role of choosing a stakeholder category, is to select a delegate from among the people in that category. The terms of office are going to be 1-year terms, beginning with the election to be held at the start of next year. And the people who you elected in Chicago to serve will remain in office until those elections are completed. There is no longer a nomination committee, and after considerable discussion of alternatives for handling offices where multiple people are running for office, we elected to go, at least for the moment, with the simplest approach, which is the candidate with the most votes wins. Section 4 deals with meetings and decisions, and the meeting requirements here are outlined to some degree of detail, and specifically allow for electronic participation in meetings that are running in face-to-face mode. So all face-to-face mode meetings will include a body that's participating electronically. And there are hooks in the document to allow for consideration of material in between physical meetings done electronically, and the exact rules for electronic deliberation between physical meetings are a key topic that the follow-on work is intended to address in the short future.
Yes, and so a highlight on that. The rules of association anticipate and permit online meetings and electronic deliberation. There are some minimum required governance rules for those. If it's a meeting, all participants have to be able to hear and be heard, and some other meaningful participation metrics, including for asynchronous meetings, such as by email, or decision-making rather, by email or other collaborative methods, where there's a period of time that the matters must be open, 14 days, I believe now, an ample period. However, there's a requirement within the draft itself that there be a standing rule specifically covering electronic deliberation, and that may be updated from time to time, of course, without having to update all of the rules of association. That is one of, I would propose, one of the more urgent matters before the plenary and the follow-on governance committee, because as we can see today, how we deliberate online and being able to do that successfully, especially asynchronously, will be essential to the success of the plenary and IDESG going forward. And we've recognized that and created a process where everybody that would like to participate in those rulemaking decisions may do so. The voting, did you cover? The voting initially was going to require 3/4 to update our governance documents. That has been lowered to 2/3 in the interest of making it more pliable to change as the plenary chooses. There was something that some people called a veto. In any case, there was a quite definitive say on matters if there were objection from the Privacy Committee in the initial draft. After Tiger Team and much deliberation, there's consensus on what we call a procedural penalty if there is objection from the Privacy Committee to a measure going through the plenary, such as a technical standard or a policy, and that would more or less trigger a 3/4 majority vote for that measure.
Lastly, the middle bullet regarding quorum, there's in the glossary section a detailed description of quorum requirements for meetings, for taking decisions by consensus, and for taking decisions by vote if that should ever be necessary.
So intellectual property, along with antitrust and an overall membership agreement, is an urgent output that will require another round of feedback and engagement, especially from the general counsels and other interested parties whose agreement is really needed before recommendation is proposed back to the plenary. There is a solid draft. It's linked at idecosystem.org/ROA, which is the static page for the current rules of association and related documents. You can also find the text of all submitted amendments there. The proposed process going forward is to have the follow-on governance committee have more or less a Tiger Team or a task force that will be specifically responsible for engagement and completion of a draft back to the plenary, which is anticipated to be decided by electronic ballot, and from the moment of adoption of a membership agreement with IPR, we can then begin triggering the deadlines for follow-on elections and some other key deadlines, including a period of time that potential members and interim members can review the membership policy and determine whether or not they may sign it before any major deadlines are required. Conflict of interest, there are conflict of interest rules. We've talked about ratification and amendment rules already. There's a glossary which is very important and that I definitely commend all of you to read at the time that you're reading through the document to understand the wording. In some cases, there's some substance in there. The special rule of order number 1 it includes a elongation of the interim period, which is necessary, we realize, to afford enough time for review and approval of membership policy and IPR. The rules of association would take effect on November 15th as they currently stand. That's when they would become active. And again, a major part of the anatomy of this proposal is to build in a continuous process from the moment of time that the rules are adopted as amended or not for a follow-on governance committee to take on the deferred items as well as finishing the IPR and other matters so that we do not drop identified matters, but rather we continue in a stepped and in a somewhat accelerated way. So at a high level, that is what is being proposed today. There are many ways to do governance. It's the view of the governance task force that this document does reflect the best thinking of our members. The members who cared about governance most showed up at many meetings. Many members that cared somewhat showed up at some meetings. And at the end of the day, the plenary wanted governance not to be the primary topic of the plenary, but rather wanted it to be sufficient and to be done in a rapid amount of time so that we can move on to the major topics of the IDSG. We commend this to you for your consideration, your adoption as a suitable answer to that call and as the initial rule set for the IDSG. Thank you very much, Bob, and back to you.
Thank you, Deza. And again, I want to say, a really heartfelt thanks to Deza and Eric and the members of the committee. The amount of time that went into the preparation of these documents for the group staggers the imagination. I was in a lot of the calls, and even my relatively flexible calendar didn't accommodate nearly all of them, and the amount of hard work that was done, for no compensation is something that I'm grateful for, and that I hope the community is grateful for also. So during the discussion of the revisions to the governance document, there were some concerns raised that there were characteristics of the original proposed governance documents which we are revising, and that those characteristics were vitally important both to individual constituencies and to the success of the effort. And in particular, we wanted to be sure, that the Privacy Committee did not feel that their ability to influence the outcome to make sure that we don't have bad decisions with respect to privacy and a framework that creates a privacy hazard for individuals. We wanted to make sure that that was respected, and we wanted to make sure that the careful work that the NPO has done to align a lot of constituencies around this effort wasn't damaged by the governance structure. So I wanted to conclude this section introducing the governance documents by inviting both a member of the Privacy Committee and a representative of the NPO to tell us a little bit about how they feel the process has turned out. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy Grant and to Aaron Titus to speak to those issues, if I can actually find Jeremy on my control panel. Gentlemen, you were both unmuted, and take it away.
Thanks, Bob. I'll be pretty quick. As an aside, I can say the wind here in D.C. has really materially picked up the last 10 minutes. I noticed online looking at all the attendees, even though we voted to adjourn, nobody's really dropped off. I just want to reiterate, because we are going to pick this up again, if anybody is feeling conflicted and feels the need to get off, all of this information is going to have to be repeated for a broader or saving your cell phone battery or whatnot, please don't feel compelled to stay on, particularly as things are really picking up in intensity. Beyond that, I just wanted to say on behalf of the NSIC National Program Office, I also wanted to thank the members of the Governance Task Force, especially the chairs, Daz and Eric, for all the hard work they put in this effort. As Bob mentioned, nobody was being paid for this. This is all a volunteer effort, and it was no small one at that. Beyond that, I do want to urge all the members of the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group to vote when we finally do call the vote to actually ratify the proposed rules of association that are before you now. As Bob mentioned, our office played a very big role in coming up with the initial drafts. As a lot of you know, following the release of NSIC in April 2011, our office kicked off a process to gather input from all sectors of the public on how a steering group to craft a framework for the identity ecosystem envisioned in the NSIC ought to be created and structured. We held a public workshop on the topic attended by nearly 300 individuals. We published a formal notice of inquiry that generated 57 written responses from a lot of different types of stakeholders. And based on the inputs we got, the Commerce Department had published a set of recommendations this past February on governance for the steering group, along with a recommended charter. We'd followed that up with a set of draft bylaws in the spring, really intended to get discussions started among stakeholders on a foundation for governance in this new steering group. The proposed rules of association that are before you today are what we view as the logical next step in this process. We've really been incredibly pleased to see a task force of dedicated private sector stakeholders come together, along with a few from the public sector, to take the drafts our office puts forward to the next level. We've also found it exciting in that the effort we've seen over these last 10 weeks has really embodied what we've already always envisioned as a handoff of NSIC to the private sector, and specifically to all of you, the members of the new Identity Ecosystem Steering Group. Now, I'll be clear, not every one of the changes that's been made in the draft is thrilling to us, but then again, we never really expected that they would be. What is more important is that the proposed rules that are before you today represent the results of a consensus process driven not by the government but by members of this new steering group. Equally important, once ratified, these rules of association will provide a solid governance foundation that will finally allow this group to move forward with a keen focus on crafting a framework for the ecosystem. I think most of us are quite eager to get on with this work and leave the governance debate behind us. This document will do this. It's been crafted by your peers, and I ask that all the members support it. We certainly will be going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeremy. This is Aaron Titus, and I appreciate this opportunity to discuss the rules of association. I'm the Privacy and Civil Liberties Delegate to the IDSG Management Council. I also want to thank my colleagues on the Governance Task Force for the multiple 5-hour meetings, the all-day meetings, the late night and weekend calls. These people brought in a broad range of perspectives and experiences and put in thousands of hours. And so I'm in New Jersey right now, and so in case my power suddenly cuts out and I go into radio silence, I'll start off by saying that I endorse the proposed rules of association, and hopefully I can spend the rest of the time adding a little bit of nuance and a few qualifications to that. But I am happy with the direction this is headed. Jay Stanley of the ACLU has said that NSTIC is like playing with nuclear fission. If you do everything right, you end up with warm water. And if you do just one thing wrong, you end up with a nuclear meltdown. And there are some days when I think that that is a gross hyperbole, and other days when I think that it couldn't be more true. I wonder sometimes whether my work in the IDSG is my magnum opus, or if it's a waste of time, or if I'm helping to create the single most pervasive surveillance tool in the history of man. Not only, I don't know the answer to that, I would also further assert that nobody has enough information to know that for sure. But here's what I do know. Professionals like Scott David and several of my others give me flickers of hope that the market may give privacy a fighting chance. But more importantly, so far in the IDSG, everything has gone right. And failure to participate can only lead to bad things from happening. And right now everybody's at the table, and only good things have happened. And I hope that we can continue that. I know that the Privacy Committee has worked very, very hard to make sure that they're working proactively, and sometimes we privacy guys get a bad rap as the people who come in and rain on the party. And this is an opportunity to truly do privacy by design from the very beginning and be partners and from the very beginning. Now, in the immortal words of Uncle Ben, somebody else might have said it, but I'll quote Uncle Ben, "With great power comes great responsibility." Now, the only body in the IDSG with absolute power is the plenary. However, the plenary has entrusted the Privacy Committee to review all IDESG work products. And with this power, the Privacy Committee has a fairly extensive set of responsibilities to the plenary that no other committee has, namely a spelled-out duty to create proactive liaison relationships with other committees and working groups, the duty to create and publish a privacy evaluation methodology, and a few others. During this process, we anticipate that we've designed the system so that any privacy concerns, first of all, we'll all know what we're looking for, and the privacy concerns can be addressed at the lowest possible step in the process. So we'll be working directly with the working groups and standing committees as they're developing their work products. In an unlikely event that the Privacy Committee identifies a situation that is just completely untenable, and all opportunities, all attempts to fix the problem at a lower level have failed, and it comes to the plenary for a vote, or I'm sorry, for consensus, the Privacy Committee may issue a formal privacy evaluation methodology. Privacy review statement. Well, they will always create a privacy review statement, and some may be very detailed, of course, depending on the nature and the need. They also may issue a formal objection. This formal objection is not an absolute stop. What it does do, though, is it creates a requirement that if the plenary wishes to override that objection by the Privacy Committee, it will require either consensus or a 3/4 majority vote. Now, our chair, the chair of the plenary, Bob Blakely, will always work extraordinarily hard to create consensus. There are multiple ways then in the bylaws and the operating procedures to deal with conflicts. You can split the question. You can send part of it back, and we don't really think that this is a likely outcome in 99% of the situations. But I wanted to make sure that we all understood what responsibilities and then therefore what authorities come with that, with the Privacy Committee. Now, there is I think a valid question that is worth asking, and that is, why does privacy get special treatment? I mean, after all, security, usability, resilience, all the core principles of NSTIC are essential. Why is privacy special? I have two answers for that. You can make money doing the other three. You can't make money doing privacy. Now, I would love nothing more than to be proven wrong, and there are some people who are in fact making livings in privacy enhancing technologies, which I think is wonderful. We need more of it, but by and large, you can't make money doing privacy. And the other reason is that as long as privacy is treated exclusively as an individual liberty or an individual right, it will always be on the losing end of the stick. Individuals do not have the same bargaining power to protect those rights. Now, that may not be satisfying for everybody, but I think that it's at least a good faith explanation of why I think privacy does in fact need some special attention. I would like to share some insights that I've gained about the mindsets that have shaped the discussion in privacy, privacy in the IDESG. And these are philosophical mindsets. One person may be of multiple mindsets and maybe of different mindsets at different times. But I think that the distinctions are real and useful to understand so that we can understand one another perhaps a little bit better. The first mindset that I've noticed is the privacy advocate mindset. And these are those who are concerned with ensuring the Platonic ideal and principle of privacy, particularly as it relates to the rights of individuals and citizens. Now, a hallmark of this mentality is to bask in the glow of one's own pure intent and ideals. For the record, I most closely identify myself with the privacy advocate mindset. The second is the privacy implementer mindset. And these are those who are concerned with implementing the ideals of privacy within a usually commercial or government context. Now, a hallmark of this mentality is to consider oneself a practical, pragmatic privacy professional. And the next mindset that I've identified I call the identity property mindset. And these are those whose business models rely upon the commoditization of human identity and treat identity as a property right belonging to the business. And people of this mindset realize that privacy and civil liberties considerations limit their commercial freedom and may hurt their business models. I've come to recognize that a hallmark of this mentality is to welcome privacy people, privacy advocates, into the discussion as long as they're not obstructionist. The final mindset that I've noticed, ideology that I've noticed that has shaped the topology of privacy within the IDSG, I call the consensus purist mindset. And these are those who ideologically consider pure consensus to be the highest, most elegant form of decision-making, and therefore have a strong allergic reaction to voting as a decision-making tool and giving any group of individuals special privileges within a consensus organization. And it has been a clash is not the correct term because it hasn't been a clash, but it really has been a conversation among these ideologies that has led to the IDSG rules of association as they exist. Now, as a privacy advocate, I think it would be great if there were some supporting legislation that said that everybody has to do privacy all the time, whatever that means, of course, and I could make sure that that happens. Well, here in the United States, we have a long and storied tradition of legislating very narrowly, and a very limited passion on privacy. And let's face it, I don't think that anybody's holding their breath for Congress to do anything anytime soon. So the reality is that we live in a market-driven industry. Now, that's good. That's very, very good. I worry that privacy will not have the market winds behind it. However, if privacy is going to succeed, it will be because we reach a status of Pareto efficiency, where everybody has enough reason to stay on the IDESG boat, and so they do. The moment that the relying parties, or let's say the data brokers or others jump ship, it's cause for alarm. If the privacy advocates start jumping ship, that's also cause for alarm. The miraculous thing is that we've been able to have the ACLU and the business community at the same table. That absolutely must continue to happen. So I think that the rules of association, as they are proposed, are most likely to to reach that goal. And so for that purpose, I endorse them, and I hope that you will too. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. So I'm sensitive to the fact that the storm is coming in upon many of us relatively rapidly. I want to describe for you the process that I intend to use for the discussion of the amendments when we get to that after our recess to next Wednesday. And then I'm going to ask all of you a question about proceeding. So our interim rules of order specify that we will be adopting things by majority vote. Therefore, what I will propose to do for each amendment is to begin with a discussion of the amendment, presentation by its proponents, and then I will ask whether there is any objection to the adoption of the amendment. If there is an objection, I will ask for the objector to explain the objection, and there'll be a discussion. And then I will ask for a poll about whether there is a consensus for deferring the amendment to the follow-on governance task force, which is described in the proposed rules of association. When you are considering that poll, you should bear in mind that adopting an amendment after the rules of association are adopted will require a 2/3 majority rather than a 50% majority, so the bar will be higher if we defer items. If there is not a consensus on whether to adopt, on whether to defer an amendment to which there's been an objection, we will proceed to a discussion, and at the end of that discussion, we will hold a poll about whether or not the amendment should be adopted, and we will abide by the 50% majority rule. If the amendment is adopted, its textual changes will be incorporated into the text of the rules of association before the vote on those rules commences. If the vote does not pass, then the amendment is not adopted and will be discarded. That's the procedure that I propose to use to dispose of these amendments after we reconvene following the recess that you all have indicated is the wisest course of action today. I do want to say one other thing about the proposed amendments. There are a couple of natural groups of amendments which might usefully be discussed as groups. The first one is number 1 and number 5. The second group is numbers 3, 4, 7, and 8. And the third group is numbers 15, 16, and 17. So I may reorder the discussion so that we consider amendments in those groups. So I don't think, given the intention and desire to recess the meeting, that it would be the wisest course of action to go through the amendments one by one now and discuss them, since we're going to do that anyway at the time that we dispose of them in the follow-on meeting. So what I would like to do instead is I would like to have participants raise hands if they think there are any other matters that need to be discussed before we recess the meeting. So I will give this a few minutes, and if anyone thinks that there is a matter which needs to be discussed, please raise your hand in the GoToWebinar hand-raising console interface, or put a comment into the SOAP Hub discussion forum. I note that John Bradley has pointed out that IETF 85 will be taking place all of next week in Atlanta, and that there is a conflict with people who are attending that meeting. He also usefully adds he appreciates there's probably no good time for everyone. We have already, as a management committee and secretariat and and the governing organization observed that there is indeed no good time for everyone. And I will note again that we are operating under a time constraint because we need to adopt some rules of order by the 15th of November in order to continue to be a normally governed organization. Did someone else want to say something?
Yes, Bob, if we may just, while you're gathering hands, it's Eric and Daza, just maybe a slight clarification that we thought the understanding, or it may have been misspeaking, was if there was objection to adopting just then, that there'd be a poll to get the sense of the participants on whether to defer action or not, and pending the sense of the participants on that poll would, potentially either defer or the ruling would be to go forward on a vote at that point. Is that was that the plan?
That was what I had intended to indicate by my earlier discussion, so I'll just say it again. The order will be discuss the amendment, call for objections to adoption of the amendment. If there is an objection, call for a poll on whether there is consensus to defer the amendment to the follow-on committee. If there is not a consensus to defer, only then proceed to a vote on adoption of the amendment or not adoption.
Great, and then we're just clarifying that the poll was to the sense of the room, not necessarily the high, almost near unanimous, perhaps, in thought of standard for deferral as opposed to the sense of the room on deferral.
Right.
Great.
I am not seeing any hands, so I'm going to ask you all if anyone has an objection to recessing the meeting until 1 p.m. Eastern Time next Wednesday, November 7th, at this time, without conducting any further business. Please raise your hand in the meeting, and if I go another couple of minutes without seeing a hand raised with an objection to recessing, then I will declare us to be in recess. By the way, please note Laura Barman's comment in the SOAP Hub that all of the information, the recording of this session, together with a transcript of the SOAP Hub commentary, will be posted to the IDESG website following this webinar. Christopher Currens has raised his hand. Christopher, I'm unmuting you for the purpose of speaking. Christopher Currens. Ooh, that was weird. Christopher, can you hear me? Can anyone else hear me at this point?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
I hear you.
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, so Christopher Currens, I believe, had a comment. Christopher, are you on the line, and would you like to speak? Oops, just a minute. Wait a minute, I'm looking for hands in the meeting. Kim Little. Kim, I am unmuting you for the purpose of speaking.
No, I don't have a question. I was answering your question.
Thank you. And Karen O'Donohue. Karen, I'm unmuting you for the purpose of speaking.
I have no comment. That was a mistake.
Thank you. And I'm looking through. I see no hands objecting to the recess of the meeting, so I would like to urge everyone to be safe and wish you all the best if you are in the path of the storm. And I now declare this meeting in recess until 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, November 7th. Good luck, everyone. Thank you very much for participating today.